You deal with a lot of business owners and you're consulting, you're training, you're speaking, all this. What have you found? I mean, why is it so hard for them to realize that they have a part to play in attracting talent?
Business owners start, I think, with the greatest intentions, but get caught up in the overwhelm and start to run their company like the worst full-time job ever. And then that becomes the next employee's worst full-time job and so on. And it becomes this cycle where if there is not some intersection to turn that around, it's implosion.
Welcome to the Turbo Branding Show, where we will help you ignite your growth by leveraging your brand to grow faster, easier, and more successfully. You'll discover insightful conversations from our powerful guests, founders, CEOs, and advisors of thriving businesses who are sharing how they've successfully built strong brands to help you expand and grow. I'm your host, Sue Kirshner, and today we are welcoming Mary Erlain to the show. So let's delve into today's episode and turbocharge your brand. First, thank you so much for being here, Mary.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation. We've had these conversations over coffee, and now we need to make it official.
Exactly. I love it. So I'm excited to talk with you about how important it is for small businesses to understand their culture and value as an employer and to build a brand that attracts top talent. And I think you have some awesome stories about that. But for all of you, let me start by introducing Mary. So Mary Erlain is the founder of Peak Development Strategies, a business consulting firm focused on helping small businesses get the most out of their people. And she wears many hats as a coach, consultant, and trainer with a specialization in generational workforce diversity. So Mary is a published author and speaker, and her most popular publication is The 5 Generations in the Workplace, which brings necessary attention to generational diversity issues that business owners face today. In her work, she collaborates with owners, management, and employees to identify and address the root causes of common issues and challenges which can impact growth, productivity, and profitability. So welcome, Mary. Did I miss anything that you would like to share?
No, I think you covered it.
You can add your shoe size. You can add some other
I know.
things.
You are very thorough in your work.
Okay, excellent. All right, perfect. Well, then let's dig in. Let's talk about one of the biggest challenges small and mid-sized businesses face when they start to scale, which is attracting more people. Because you can't grow if you don't have the people necessary to facilitate that growth. And then once you have people, how do you build a culture where they want to stay? And Mary, I think you're the perfect person to talk about this. So you and I have talked a lot over the past few years about employer branding, but in your mind, what is it and why do small companies need that?
Well, the first thing is they need to work with you. And no, you didn't pay me to say that. They need to work with you to actually identify that brand. For me, a lot of the mistakes people make is the whole hiring process. The brand actually becomes kind of a heartbeat of that for at least the way I do things. I assist small business owners in that process. Right now, I'm literally in the heat of helping a firm find a senior accountant. And it is about the resume, but that is such a small portion for me. In hiring his very first employee, who is still happily with him years later, he and I talked at length about how is it that we can immerse his values. He has a very strong brand, so he did establish that on the front end, and I picked that up and brought that into the behavioral interview process, where I'm looking for somebody who has the right fit. Because at the end of the day, it's that right fit, the attitudes and the habits, because you can teach people anything. She did have a phenomenal baseline of skills that he could build upon. And let me tell you the great end of the story. We had 3 final candidates. One had a CPA. The other one had a bachelor's in accounting. and another one was self-learned. And do you want to guess which one he picked?
Hmm.
He picked,
Self-learned.
he did,
Yeah.
because she was a lifelong learner like he was, and she absolutely emulated his values so that any client that she ever spoke to, any engagement she ever tackled, any networking group she ever attended, it was as if he was there because he is the brand. And that is oftentimes ignored because we're looking at the task list and the overwhelm that the small business owners have, and we're not paying enough attention to the principles you and I absolutely believe in and are the heartbeat of our work.
Hmm. No, I like that. So yeah, and I like what you were talking about with in terms of, hiring the first employee. And obviously it was such a right fit that they're around years and years later. But it is, I mean, hiring people is a huge problem for small business owners as they try and scale. So I know I had a client who brought me in and he was saying, you know what, I have all these growth opportunities in front of me. But if I can't bring on two more salespeople and the customer service people to back that up, I can't go after new business. He's like, I am absolutely at a standstill and stalled in my business growth until I can get new people in. But he said, but as a small business, nobody knows about us, right? No one knows anything about you. They don't recognize your name. They don't have a perception like, oh, they haven't heard like, oh, that's a great place to work, or oh, that's, where a friend of mine works and I heard it's really cool, and things like that. You don't have any of that. So that's why it was so important for him to reach out to me, was to come in and say, hey, help me figure out how to tell my story so that we can attract people to come and work here, because I am absolutely paralyzed until we can do that. So,
Oh, absolutely. And then what you described was sometimes the desperation takes hold and they'll take anybody that
anybody.
looks good. But in reality, you do that and that can destroy your good work because, if there isn't enough front end work, that individual comes in and now they become part of your brand.
Hmm.
And that can be to your detriment.
Yes.
Uh, so, there needs to be a lot more work. And it sounds easy to just bring about aboard an employee, and it isn't. There's a lot of various angles and research and work that is done. But oh, by the way, you have all this business that you have to do. You have clients that you need to deliver to, and you can't put a block of hours together. Usually it's folded in to little bits and bites of the day, and it's impossible to get any momentum or leverage or continuity in that process. So that isn't an advertisement for me to help you. That is truly, in essence, just a big red flag that don't do it alone. Seek, some level of help. Staffing agencies are great, but they're looking to put somebody in the seat. Look for someone who's willing to take up that work and really be passionately interested in finding you that person that's going to be with you years later and literally in your absence can represent the company the very same way that you represented or founded the company. It is possible. And it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. You just need to find people that are really invested in your success,
Hmm.
not filling a seat. Very different outcomes.
Right. Right. No, I agree with that. And yeah, it's interesting because you sit there and you say, well, bringing in someone who's the wrong fit, the wrong seat, and we've heard the stories about, oh, well, it poisons the culture, or, the person's not going to stay there that long and it's going to cost us more money to replace them again. Or it may even be that because you've poisoned the culture, your top performers all take a walk because they don't want to deal with this new person who came in, right? Who's disrupting the flow. But I also look at it from the standpoint of, from the customer point of view, right? Whether they're actually facing customers or just part of a process that affects the customer, because every single person within an organization, especially service organizations, are brand ambassadors. And if you're just going to hire somebody to fill a seat, like you were talking about, is that person going to make or break your brand when they come to work every day and either are interacting with customers or, like I said, they're affecting the process in some way, shape, or form. So it's absolutely essential to, I think, sit down and say, we've got to figure out what the culture is. And then once we know what the culture is and the value and how we want to serve our clientele and things like that, then you look for, all right, well, how do we articulate that in a way that's going to attract talent to the organization that's going to help us to grow? So
that can absolutely be a process that can work in parallel, because I've been in that situation where the brand was being established in terms of more the external, but at the same time, I was called in to help transform the culture. So understanding what was being given and what the president of the company had as a vision, and that the executive team then established. Now we had to work internally. And now this company, it was actually international. And I was looking at the USA affiliate. And so we already had some of the international branding, but Europe is different than USA. And so in that case, that's absolutely something you can speak to, is how is that even possible? Well, you need to take into account that USA customers are not European customers. So there needs to be some additional work. That was being done. And in my case, we had to then take that and bring that internally, which is the piece that I worked on. And I sat down with the president of the company, because we had two of those people that were what you might term bad actors. And I was very aware, he was very aware. And I said, just to be aware, not everybody is going to get on this bus. You may end up losing people. But it is possible, if they're interested, to take all of their efforts being bad actors and turn those for good. They were very concerned. Eventually, we did turn one of them around.
Okay.
And that was a senior manager, and he became one of the greatest evangelists. The bad actor really dug in deep, and they were concerned because he's one of these people that had the most glowing resume. Just a brilliant, brilliant individual who just had a lot of bad attitude and habits.
Okay.
And wasn't interested. And, the day I had seen long before that they should let him go, but I'm not there to tell you what to do. I'm there to help you understand the cause and effect of your decisions.
Right.
The day they let him go, there was a whole group of people that affiliated on a daily basis frequently, because of the nature of the way the company worked. They literally threw a party.
Oh.
And it was in that day that the culture, it was like flipping a switch on, because the bad actor was acting as an impediment, a governor, a drag, a ball and chain to the growth of the company. And there you could move, there was no moving that, because he played such an integral role in the organization, that all of our good work together, as an example, we couldn't get past that. And once that obstacle was taken, the president was awestruck and truly said, I should have done this a long time ago. Yeah. I didn't disagree. But there is a great example of the synchronicity. You can't work on one without working on the other. If you work on the external brand, it isn't just going to naturally flow internally. Correct. Vice versa. The two need to be worked on in sync. Whether they're 1 and 2 or 1A and 1B.
Right. You have to do it the same. No, exactly. I mean, the brand promise at its core should be the same for every single stakeholder. It's, what feeling or what value are you going to get with work, interacting with this organization? And that's what the brand should promise. We're going to promise that every time you interact with us, you will experience X, right?
Right.
So, but the way you talk about it or the way you manifest that value is different for an employee than it is for a customer, than it is for a investor or a strategic partner or things like that. But the core promise still stays the same. So you're
Exactly.
right. You have to work on them in tandem because it's all part of that same promise. And especially, like we said, in a service business, if your employees are the ones delivering the product, so to speak, they're delivering the experience and the value, they had better know what the brand is. Otherwise, everyone's going to go, Wild West. They're going to go and they're going to say, well, I think we should be doing this. And so this is the way I'm going to act. And this is the way I'm going to deliver. Or I'm a salesperson and without clear, messaging, I think this is what I should say. And suddenly you have a brand that means nothing because it's not cohesive. It's not consistent. So,
Hmm. Absolutely.
yeah.
And another example, bringing the generational piece into it is, an established organization said, you know what, looked around and realized, yeah, we're all about in the same age group, give or take. We just need to bring somebody young in. And I chuckled, not
Mm-hmm.
outwardly, but I had a
Yeah.
good laugh internally. And I said, well, help me understand where you are, this organization as it is set up right now can embrace somebody a generation or two younger than all of you. And I had a lot of wrinkled and
Mhm.
furrowed brows.
Yeah.
They didn't understand the question. And I said, until there is a firm understanding and answers to the question, don't make that move because you'll end up with a revolving door. And there is another common assumption is we can just hire our Gen Zs and our Y.2 millennials into organizations and talk about, an impediment to the culture and talk about throwing an arrow right through your brand promise. Because again, the brand promise and the organizational structure and the culture, it all needs to, in essence, have a greater understanding of what that means to younger generations.
Right. Right.
Great example is the Cracker Barrel. The new CEO, not saying any of the changes the CEO had are good, bad, or indifferent,
Yeah.
but the method by which that was handled was flawed. And in essence, they're following the older generations typically, as well as family,
Mm-hmm.
took offense to that. And, they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. So, well, it seems pretty obvious to you and to me that you need to be able to articulate why someone should come and work for your organization. But a lot of times, and I'm sure you've seen this way more than I have, it's like, oh, we'll just throw up an ad on Indeed and we'll see who we get kind of a thing. But why can't business owners put that mirror to themselves and basically just say, what is my role in attracting talent here? What is my role in defining why someone should spend, the majority of their week here working for us, helping us deliver on our mission and our, promise and building the company. I mean, you deal with a lot of business owners and you're consulting, you're training, you're speaking, all this. What have you found? I mean, why is it so hard for them to realize that they have a part to play in attracting talent?
I think there's many reasons. I think the first can be overwhelm.
Yeah.
The fact that these business owners, I was talking to one this morning on the phone who has this vision of starting this company, and I could hear you in my ear as she was talking,
Yeah.
because I think what she wants and has a vision to do, but all she's looking at is the tasks. I need a corporation check. I need
Hmm.
and um, so we don't know what we don't know. I call it DK squared. Then we get a little success under our belt. Now we're drowning in our to-do list.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is just oftentimes lack of knowledge, because there's a lot of professionals out there who are willing to tackle that to-do list and get paid to do that for you. And so there isn't enough pause in saying, in order for me to actually be successful and move through those stages of business growth, I have to define who I am as an individual. You mentioned Indeed.
Mhm.
That ad that I have up on Indeed right now absolutely has the brand promise in the opening remarks.
Good.
The values are stated.
Mhm.
And so right up front, that owner was asked to, in essence, state the brand promise from that perspective as the company as a whole and the expectation of what an employee or who an employee that would be successful is. So you mentioned, in this case, Indeed just becomes a place to gather resumes.
Mm.
I use it as a place to move people away. So, some of it is the motive by which you're doing what you're doing. Everything that you're doing on that to-do list, is it to move the brand forward or is it to check a box?
Yeah.
So business owners start, I think, with the greatest intentions, but get caught up in the overwhelm and start to run their company like the worst full-time job ever. And then that becomes the next employee's worst full-time job and so on. And it becomes this cycle where if there is not some intersection to turn that around, it's implosion,
Mhm.
and you then take it to a business broker to sell it. And the business broker tells you there isn't a business here to sell.
Right.
You didn't take the time to build it.
Right. Yep.
You were either a vendor to your clients or you're actually a company brand.
Mhm.
Drastically different looks.
I agree. I agree. No, you articulated that incredibly well. So, well, with the clients that you work with, once you've identified your employer brand and you know that you need to attract more talent in order to grow, what are some of the best practice tactics for doing that? How do you promote or how do you market your company as a place to work?
Well, the one thing I warn business owners is that people that are candidates for roles are really, really good at research.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, you had that little 1x1, 1.5 by 1.5 ad in the job search, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond gracing the doorstep of an office or a store or a building or whatever, that was it. Beyond the yellow pages.
Yes.
So today I can look you up on social media. I can look you up at your website. I can look you up in various business channels such as Yelp and the like. So there better be a consistent story. There better be a story.
A story at all, right? Yes.
But there better be a consistent story, because if there isn't, then you may be missing out on a lot of really great talent because they're going to pass you by.
Right.
At the same time, it's an opportunity because there's a lot of people, like for this senior accountant role. This is the prime time to be looking for somebody, because somebody in a job working for a large corporation is staring down the calendar months that are flying by and are suddenly going to be in another tax season where it's all hands on deck. And so there is a lot of opportunity for small business owners, if they play this right, to attract top talent out of corporations who have kind of lost sight of the internal brand. They're investing it all into the external brand,
Okay.
and not enough on the internal brand. So there's an opportunity. If a small business or medium business is willing to invest in it, you can purge a lot of talent from large companies.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I,
glass half full, glass half empty. I see it. And in our search right now, I'm seeing that actually happening, is noting where some of these folks are coming from. Is they're seeing this as an opportunity to become part of a culture. And we positioned it well.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I like that. And you're right. It's one of those, I mean, I've had a couple of my clients who have brought me on to help with the employer brand. They're like, we can't find any people. We're not getting any applications. But then when you ask them, you're like, well, where are you promoting your positions? Well, it's not listed on their website. They don't post it all on social media. They have one little ad on Indeed, but nothing on LinkedIn and things like that. And like you said, in today's environment, whether you're talent or whether you're even a customer, people are researching online and they want to get the information that they're looking for. And if you don't have it out there, you absolutely will not be considered as a place to work
Mm-mm.
or to do business with. So,
And conversely, I'm asking the client, what questions do you have for us?
mhm,
Which is an open-ended question to say, what kind of research did you do
mhm.
on the company? So if I hear in an interview that, well, I haven't really looked at the website and I don't really know who they, and so on and so forth,
Yeah,
that's a bit of a red flag for me to say, okay, is this somebody just churning through, or is this somebody who really wants to buy in? Back to that candidate who was self-learned,
yeah,
it was as if she was part of his strategic planning process where the values were established. It was like she was a little fly on the wall
yeah,
because the way she emulated those was absolutely amazing. And she also did the research and she understood what the logo meant because there's a very specific meaning to the logo. She wanted this. She
yeah,
wanted this role.
yeah.
And granted, there's much more she had to prove out than that, but it was to someone's detriment for them not to research an organization. So it goes two
It
ways.
goes two ways. You're right. Absolutely right. And, you're right in that the company, when you talk about right fit, right, you should know what your employer brand is because you want to make sure you're attracting the right people who are going to be excited by that are, just as you're not going to attract every customer out there with your, customer facing brand, you don't want to. You want to focus on the people that are going to be loyal and be the most profitable and spend the most amount of their dollars, so to speak, or their wallet for investing with you. And the same thing with the employees. You want them to be loyal.
Mhm.
So in that case, as you alluded to earlier, you have to be pickier and you have to say, I understand my culture, I understand my values, I understand my employer brand, so that when someone walks in the door, and if they don't have someone like you who can help do some of that initial evaluations and things like that on candidates, then they need to be absolutely clear if this person is going to help or hinder their brand. So that's great.
Well,
I have a couple more questions for you.
sure.
You alluded to this story earlier that I know we talked about prior to taping this, but has focusing on being a better employer forced companies to change their culture or really strengthen what they think is the core value of their brand? Have you seen that happen?
I see it to some degree,
Okay.
but sometimes in companies that have layers, it
Hmm.
stops at some layer or it doesn't move down the org chart. However, when I'm in that process, I flip the org chart and we have an inverse org chart,
Hmm.
meaning that anybody that is client facing is at the top of the org chart. So anybody that has a strong position in delivery,
Hmm.
um, they're the ones that are delivering the brand on a consistent basis.
Yes.
And there are some companies that have gone through great lengths to build their customer service skills, large companies where there's a lot of active listening and a lot of summarizing and a lot of, now some of those may be AI generated or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's decent.
Hmm.
People are not flying by the seat of their pants. So from a brand perspective, that's really where a lot of effort, because that can make or break whether a customer stays or a customer goes.
Right.
So I think the brand promise and the values and all of that does, in essence, need to be formed by a smaller group of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Then it needs to be brought out into the larger organization for
Right.
buy-in. And I think that's where things are falling short, is customer buy-in as well as employee buy-in. From your perspective, I know you go to great lengths to take that to customers and to test that market. And is that true? Or are those just flowery words that, could go on a wall art?
Right.
Or is that really what your customers believe? So I know that's your work. My work is driving that down into the buy-in for all the employees, which is what we
Yeah.
did, to a point that there was a 2x3 picture that had the values, and every employee signed off on it. And it wasn't like with a gun to the head. No, they really believed that's what the brand promise, that's what the values of the organization was. And they signed off on it. And it was in a prominent place for them to be reminded, as well as for customers to see.
Yeah.
In your case, it's your work to confirm that is, in essence, what clients expect and or are receiving.
Yeah. Now, one of my, building on what you're talking about, you're right. I mean, the brand absolutely has to be part of the communication that continuously happens throughout the organization internally. So everyone understands the brand and the expectation of what they're delivering. But one of the best client projects I was on was the CEO was absolutely adamant that I am the steward of the brand. I need to walk the talk. I need to set the tone for this. And I used to love it because he asked me to put together these little like index cards. And on one side was the core values, and on the other side was the brand promise. And we had it laminated. And every time he would walk into a meeting with his leadership team, he would throw that card on the table. And no matter what strategic decision was made, he would ask, are we adhering to our core values? And are we delivering on our brand promise? And if we're not, why are we talking about this? And it was brilliant, because then the leaders would then take that to their teams and do exactly the same thing. But you're right, it has to be infused throughout the entire organization for the brand to just be as strong as it can be. So
I had an owner literally take that, it was a sheet of paper, it was his preference, and slid that over in the hiring process and said, what does this mean to you? So that was in the form of a candidate question or qualifying question, to literally be handed this and to speak off the cuff, speak about it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of data, verbal and nonverbal, in that activity. And I had to give credit to the founder of the law firm to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
That is brilliant. I like that. So, all right, one last question for you. Since you are the authority, in my opinion, on generational workforce diversity, and you see a lot of articles out there and a lot of people talking about, what do millennials want in a work or in an employer, and what do Gen X want in an employer, and Gen Z and things like that. But can you talk about just some of the differences you see in the attitudes towards work, and then what's most important to them when they're looking for an employer?
Okay, so I'm going to start with Gen Z.
Okay.
And our Gen Zs are about 26 and under. So right now, they have had some of the hardest times, because during their emotional development years, were some of our toughest years in the US, when we're looking at it financially, politically, health, all of those created, and many others have created, great turbulence. So they're kind of coming in bruised. And it's kind of why the book on Gen Z has some very turbulent waters on the cover, because that's kind of how it is. But younger or older generations aren't, and even our youngest millennials and Gen Xers and boomers aren't necessarily making it easy. So what is a pathway to get to them for sure? And that is mentorship. Mentorship, management, different things. Mentorship is leaning in, and that can be on a subject, that can be on a skill set, that can be overall work development. It can take on many forms, but leaning in and helping, and that's what the next book is on, is mentorship. Developing a mentorship program across a whole organization is the key to bringing them in to help navigate. Right now, we're being very divisive as opposed to inclusive. And they share some great knowledge and experience that we don't possess. Our millennials, stop thinking they're 20 years old anymore. Our millennials have spent more than 20 years in the workforce. They're turning 44 next year at the oldest. 44. You know, some could have kids literally going to college or graduating high school.
Yeah.
So they haven't really been given a chance to be seen as mature people, and also understand that they're kind of 27 to 43, slice them in half. There's two subsets. So part of it is have knowledge, very similar to older boomers, younger boomers.
Okay.
There's two very distinct subsets. And the millennials, again, really would benefit from a lot of mentorship, but really buy into the fact and begin to lean into helping develop that next layer of ownership and leadership. And many of them have been entrepreneurs and built extremely successful companies. And our Gen Xers are now kind of sitting back and going, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And there's a tremendous opportunity. The younger generations, the millennials and the Zoomers, definitely want an organization that is not just in it for the big profit. They're very cause-oriented.
Yes.
The Xers are ripe to take those positions in philanthropic organizations because they're now beginning to hit, what does the sunset of, I know it's kind of hard to believe, but what is the sunset of my career going to look like?
Right.
And if you don't get their buy-in, they may just step away to something else. And they're in a position to be able to do so.
To do that. Yeah.
So again, I think in general, I think I just pretty much defined employee buy-in.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Because we're talking for 3 generations, technically millennials are 2. But at the end of the day, we all have unique thumbprints. So it's understanding it from a generalistic perspective, but leaning into the individual and understanding their why.
Yeah.
Why? Because your why as the owner of the company is to create a successful company. Unless they have the same last name as you and they're set to inherit the company, their why is different.
Yep.
Find it out.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. That was brilliant. I appreciate that so much. Just, as we say, one of the biggest challenges small business owners face is attracting talent. And here we've talked about, employer branding, you need to have it. And also you need to understand what each generation within the workforce wants and craves as they choose where they want to spend their time and share their expertise. So I have one last question for you. I'd like to, at the end of these interviews, give a shout out to a small business or an organization that's just doing an amazing job when it comes to branding. So what is a business that you admire for the way that they go to market and brand?
So since I was young, First American Bank had the greatest commercials.
Yes.
They did. And I think they took that cutting edge kind of tongue-in-cheek humor about something that can be pretty boring. Because a bank is a bank is a bank, especially here in Illinois where we have so many.
Mhm.
But that really came to life as a customer, a business customer, when there was a tragedy, around my business, and I was left in a bit of a lurch and found myself at First American Bank and in Naperville, the Naperville location.
Mhm.
And it was like the commercials came to life. It was like the brand just literally sprung to life, because it was like once they knew my name, and now anytime I go in there or go through the drive-through occasionally, and I find reason to do that instead of using the app,
Mhm.
because they do have a tongue-in-cheek, JB Phillips, who's my direct banker, immense sense of humor, brilliant man, but they do live the brand promise. I'm not saying they're walking around with those funny accents like the
Like in the commercials.
gentleman's son. Actually, it was his son after the man passed, or nephew, one of the two.
Yes.
It was like I was living in the commercial in its own way. I didn't feel like I was walking into a bank. I was walking, into a place
Yeah.
that lived up to, its brand promise. So it isn't, like it's a fairly well-known organization, but they do it.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, thank you. So, Mary, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing all of your great insights on employer branding. But if people want to learn more about how you can help their business with their people challenges, or book you to speak, or find your books on generational workforce diversity, how can they find you?
Well, they can find my books on Amazon, and I will shamelessly self-promote, at least with a picture, so they
Okay.
can freeze frame and see
Nice.
one of the books, and search me by name. But my website is peak dash D as in David, S as in Sam, for peakdevelopmentstrategies.com. And, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I use my middle initial L, but you
Mhm.
can search for Mary Erlain. There's only one of me in the business world, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Well, there you
Um,
go.
and I love to speak on that generational topic, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you again.
thank you.
And yeah, thank you all of the listeners here for joining us for this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could help me build the brand for the show. So please share this episode and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you or someone you know would be a great guest for the show, a founder or CEO with an inspiring branding story, please let us know in the comments or connect with us via email. Otherwise, thank you and stay tuned for our next episode.